Welcome to the Clarity Advisor Show, where you'll learn how to grow your team today. Join Ken Trupke and his guests as they discuss what works and doesn't work to grow your team in today's world. And now, your host, Ken Trupke.
Hello again, and welcome to the Clarity Advisor Show. And one of the ways to get better is to listen to an expert. And my guest today has more than 3 decades of experience leading companies and speaking to audiences around the globe about leadership, business, and navigating an ever-changing marketplace. Here to share some wisdom and insights, Mr. Bo Short. Bo, welcome to the show.
Ken, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure. So this is going to be fun. So tell us, let's just jump into what you're up to today. Tell us about what you've got going and who you serve.
That's a great question, because it's easy to bring you up to speed. I work with a lot of companies, universities, executives, and so I do a lot of either keynote speaking. I do a lot of executive mentoring. A lot of people call it coaching. I don't coach. I think it's so much deeper than that. It's about mentoring somebody on a path to take them from where they are to where they should be and where they want to be. I do a lot of workshops and trainings for sales folks, for professionals, for customer service people, for executive teams. And I'm just able to take over 30 years of experience now and hopefully wisdom at this point and kind of bring it to the forefront and help people become better and more productive at what they do.
Excellent. Now you've had a great career as a speaker. You've been over 1 million people in front of over 1 million people in 35 countries. Does the message change? I'm curious as you speak to different people in different places in the world, are there different things you have to say to different people, or is it kind of people are people and a lot of it's consistent?
People are people. One of the things I remember, I was in Argentina one time, and I was talking to this audience, and this lady's very, very kind lady raised her hand, and she goes, "You're not from around here," because I was talking about pursuing your dreams and accomplishing your goals in life, and she said, "Well, you're not from around here. You don't know us." And I made the comment back to a translator. I said, "Well, when you go to bed at night, do you dream?" She said, "Of course." I said, "Do you dream about a better life for your children? Do you dream about a stronger country? Do you dream about more time with the people you love?" And she said, "Of course." I said, "Well, I do too. We just do it in different languages." And what I've learned with people is if you can cast a vision for their life, and there's 5 key attributes I talk a lot about: vision, courage, perseverance, responsibility, and character. From just strictly a superficial leadership level. But I find that in even those people may dream in different languages, or they have different accents, or even different cultures, the heartbeat of the person is the same. They all want a better life for their children, more opportunity for the people that they love. What I do find interesting is I have been to countries where people have a literal boot on their neck by their government or by certain policies in a certain country. And I find that, like in America, for example, I have this perplexing thought oftentimes when you go to a very hard country where people can't express themselves freely like they want to because of this boot on their neck, is it worse to have a boot on your neck, unable to speak out, or to not have a boot on your neck like in America and you're unwilling to speak out? And I find oftentimes in more repressed countries that there's this stronger desire for entrepreneurship, whereas in America, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes people just have taken it for granted so long they don't even understand it anymore. But people are the same. People have the same thoughts and dreams.
Yeah, that's great how you brought that woman along with the idea of such personal examples of dreaming and better life and things. That's so powerful. So I want to go dive into the 5 things. Courage caught my ear. Tell me about that.
Well, so much of this, and this came about not because of me. This came about because as I was starting to be blessed with success in my life and in business, and I started interviewing people because I started writing books on leadership. And so whether it was a Hall of Fame athlete, whether it was a United States senator, regardless of the person I talked to, I would say, give me the attributes of leadership. And all of them would say things like risk or tact or teamwork. I mean, everybody had a little different take, but every man and woman that I interviewed said the 5 same words: vision, courage, perseverance, responsibility, and character. That's where that came from. It didn't come from me. It came from interviewing people that had more success than I did at the time in different areas of their life. But courage is an interesting one. I tell people all the time, when I do executive mentoring, or I'm doing a workshop, or I'm on a main stage talking to the audience at large, I always tell them the same thing. Courage is not something you find. Courage is something that finds you, and it finds you because you're prepared for it. Most people in most settings, in most companies, in most things, they're afraid of venturing out or stepping out and going for it, so to speak. And you find that through repetition, through practice, is where you gain that ability to repeat it over and over again. But practice is nothing more than failing a lot. Let's be real blunt about that. And that's how you refine those skill sets, until one day you're out again and you're afraid, and this thing comes up from behind you and wraps its arms around you and says, "I'm courage, and it's going to be all right." Courage finds you. It doesn't find you sitting on a lazy boy chair. It finds you out making things happen. I was in my dad, for those people that don't know, was chief of staff for, at the time, the longest serving senator in the history of the United States. And I was honored to have a dad that was ranked as one of the 50 most powerful staff members in Washington, D.C., but he was the greatest dad in the world too. And I was in his office one day, and he always had a who's who in his office. So I would go hang out in his office a lot. And the Secretary of the Army was in his office. And my dad said, tell my son what you did in Vietnam. And he said, well, my job was to go down through these tunnels and chase the Viet Cong through the tunnels, because the Viet Cong had a very elaborate tunneling system where they traveled. And my dad said, well, tell him who was the first one in the tunnel of your men. And he said, well, that would have been me. And I looked at him and I said, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not asking this. I'm asking out of ignorance, but I'd like to know, were you scared? And he said, of course I was scared, but I was prepared. And when you're prepared, you run towards the things you're afraid of versus away from them. Courage finds people that are prepared.
That's so good. So good. And I want to get into some of your history too in a minute, but first you said practice is failing. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, one of the things I try to tell sales professionals or executives as well is what happens is, when you've gained this quote unquote experience in your life and people think, wow, you've got it all together. You've just, you have this posture about you. And I try to explain to people, posture is nothing more than confidence. Confidence is born through repetition, and repetition at its core is practice. And the art of practice is the art of failing. And you figure these things out. And so when what people want is I heard my wife said this so profoundly. She said, what people want is your glory, but not your story. They want that end result, but they don't want to pay that price to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where practice is. And that's the beauty of it. I mean, all I did in my early part of my career is I failed. And I had little successes, and I failed, and I had little successes, and I started refining that through repetition that gave me confidence. And then one day you're on a stage and people think, well, you've just got it all together. And you're like, well, then you don't know me that well, because I messed up a lot to get here.
Yeah, let me introduce you to my wife. She will be happy to point out how not perfect I am, right? So take us back, Bo, to 3 decades of history in speaking and leading and running companies. Give us a little bit of where that started. It sounds like maybe you grew up in Washington, D.C. or Virginia or somewhere in that area. Where did you grow up? How did you get in this? And what brought you to this point?
Well, I grew up right outside of Washington, D.C., in Springfield, Virginia. I ended up going to the College of William and Mary on a full football scholarship in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I was blessed to be introduced to opportunity. I had a blessing in my life that I had parents that were overachievers. In fact, my parents, their nature was, you've heard that statement, well, if it's been done before, you can do it. Which is, when I hear people say, well, they were taught that as a kid, I think that's wonderful. My parents taught me something beyond that. They said, even if it's never been done before, you can do it. I mean, why not you? Somebody's going to be the first to do something. Why not you? And so I barely graduated from college. I barely got out. I barely got in and barely got out. But I kind of set sail in my life, and I wanted to. It was more than being successful. I wanted to do something significant. My own personal belief is God put you on this earth to do something that matters, to do something that makes a difference in the lives of other people. So of course I wanted to have success, but I wanted to have it where it mattered and how it mattered. And as my journey started, and it was hit and miss. It was hit and miss, but I always was this guy that thought, why not me? Why not? Why can't I have that success and influence people around me likewise? And so I would try businesses, I would try my own companies, and then I started building teams and started having really great successes. Um, I'll tell you what's interesting is a turning point for me was one of my early mentors made the comment to me when I was struggling trying to figure things out. He made the comment to me. He said, "Listen, you're going to have to read more. You're going to have to read people skills books, personality books, relationship books, biographies and autobiographies. And you have to understand, Ken, at the time, I was completely against reading. I graduated from the second oldest college in America reading Cliff Notes and chapter summaries. And that is not something I'm proud of at all. But the point was this. I went from, and my first, I rebuffed that idea. I said, I don't want to read. I don't want to read those kind of books. And he said, well, if you want to have great significant role in life, you have to read books about people that lived those lives and how they did it. And I went from not reading, I could read, but I didn't like it, to reading and not liking it, to reading and liking it, to reading and loving it, to writing books. And my point is this, and if all you get out of this conversation, your audience gets out of this, is this: on the other side of everything you do not want to do lives everything you want. Significance and success is not born through doing the things that are easy and the things you want to do. It's born doing more than you think is possible for you to do and things you traditionally don't want to do. And that's where this significance lives.
Oh, that's so good. Thanks for sharing that. And we're going to get into some of the other lessons you've learned through your career and specifically around building and growing teams when we come back from the other side of the break. We'll be right back. You're on the Clarity Advisor Show. Stay with us.
Is your business where you want it to be or on track to get there? Clarity Advisors helps business leaders improve communication and get your team aligned and engaged for greater success. We specialize in helping you streamline your sales and operating systems to improve efficiency and grow your profits. Call or text Ken at 616-822-2998 to have a complimentary 12-minute call to see what some clarity could do for you.
Okay, welcome back to the Clarity Advisor Show. Today, we're joined by Bo Short. And Bo, talk about over the decades that you've been building teams, some of the lessons that you've learned, and maybe some of the mistakes that you've made that we can learn from.
I love this. I love talking about this because it's an easy way to tell you what I did wrong. I remember when I was in my 30s, I didn't want to tell you anything I did wrong. And the older I got, the more I understood it was important to know what I did wrong so people wouldn't repeat my mistakes. A couple things I think are important. Oftentimes I find with younger leaders or people that's kind of set sail in life to want to chart their own course and rise in a company or as an entrepreneur, there's a tendency, if you're not careful, when you do something well, to kind of want people to know that, hey, I did that, so recognize me so I can take that next step forward. Here's what I've learned over time. If you have to be the guy, and when I say guy, I mean man or woman. If you have to be the guy, you'll never be the guy. If you're willing to shine that spotlight on other people and uplift them and recognize them and make them the guy, you'll always be the guy. Because people so appreciate the fact that you give them credit for the things that go well and you take the heat for the things that don't. And when I was younger, I wanted to make sure that people knew I did that. And that's not a healthy thing to do, nor is it proper in real servant leadership. I mean, servant leadership is one of the most beat up statements in the world, and people don't fully understand it. But it really is a matter of serving other people. So the one thing I learned early on was learn how, when things go well, to give that credit to other people, and when things don't go well, to absorb that for yourself. Because the people around you are smart, they understand what's happening, and they so appreciate the fact that you're helping uplift them in good times. I think that was a real critical misstep I made early on. I told you about reading. That was something I had to become good at, because I started to understand that there's power in the written word that can help move you to places you never thought possible, because it gives you a frame of reference for what other people have done before you. I became much more adept at understanding history and those seemingly insignificant moments in people's lives that created history. And so you start to realize that it's through the mundane effort of the daily trudging that you do, and you feel like you're not getting anywhere, but if you are willing to stick with that day after day after day, you'll wake up one day and you'll have accomplished more than you ever dreamt possible. And that's something I had to learn. It was that perseverance that I had to really learn to become good at.
Right, right. Yeah, I've read enough biographies and now encourage others to read biographies, because one thing that I learned from reading all those biographies is that nobody's life is easy or perfect, that everybody has challenges. And you don't think of Lincoln or Grant or Roosevelt or anybody in history as having had a lot of adversity, but they've all had a ton of adversity. In fact, the times of adversity far outweigh their times of success. If you look at the actual, just the years of their life, that how much time did they spend in adversity versus in success? And it's not much in success. And yet we remember them for their success, and their success is what changed history. And so it's just a great reminder of, oh, yeah, everybody goes through adversity, everybody faces challenges. But if you persevere, you can get to that success and ultimately that significance on the other side. Yeah, so good.
Let me interject there, Ken, because I think this is really important too. Because I that is the secret of perseverance. Napoleon said the greatest attribute of a soldier is not loyalty nor courage; it's endurance. It's the ability to keep going. And the easiest story for me to relate to is when you think of George Washington, the father of our country. Now, this is not a guy that won a lot of battles. He won the war, which is the key, but he didn't win a lot of battles. And he was working with people that weren't fighting as Americans initially. They were fighting as Virginians and Hampshiremen and Marylanders. They were fighting for a colony. They were freezing. They hadn't been paid, many of them. They didn't eat well. And so what you feel as the leader is insignificant. You feel like, what difference can I make? And for your audience that owns traditional businesses or is the executive of a traditional company, around 4:59 when everybody's leaving, you're still at the office. And you have a tendency to feel alone. What happened, though, to George Washington at that moment where he felt the most insignificant? You're trying to find this way to spark something in an organization to move it forward. He walked in front of his troops that were not fighting as Americans, and he said this: "Let only Americans stand watch this night." And it was those words, a simple phrase, gave breath, because it rallied a group of people, gave breath to the Declaration of Independence. In the early 60s, one of the greatest speeches in the history of this country was given by Martin Luther King Jr. at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where he quoted from that same Declaration of Independence that years earlier, when someone who was a leader who felt insignificant and alone spoke those words in 1989 in Tiananmen Square in China, when the government killed their own children. When they they threw these kids in wheelbarrows to roll them away, and clenched in their fists was the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America. Yes, what you do as a leader oftentimes feels insignificant and you feel alone. But if you keep going and you keep moving, you create history.
So good. So good. All right, Bo, who do you serve? Who is your audience and what are you doing for them?
Yeah, it's interesting. It depends on what a company or a university is looking for, an executive is looking for. I spend my time now just working if I'm working with an executive, it's because they know they're missing the mark somewhere, or they want to refine their skills, they want to become a better leader. I mean, if leadership is a scale of 1 to 10, we all fit somewhere in there. There's only a handful of 10s in the world, and I'm not one of them. So there's this gamut. So if it's for an executive, it's somebody that may be struggling at work or wants to take the next big step in their life, not just professionally but personally. If it's a company, it's because in 2 instances, and it's kind of interesting, things are going great, but they want to know how to become greater, or they're living in chaos and they want to know how to navigate through it. If it's I've spoken for a distinguished lecture series at universities. If it's a college, you're dealing with a group of young people that may see the world differently than somebody that's 64 looking back versus somebody that's 22 looking forward. But they want to know what to expect and what they need to do to kind of live that life of significance and be successful at work or whatever they do with their family. So it really just depends. The constituents change depending on whether it's a company or a person, but at the core of it, it's all centered around leadership and how to streamline an organization and make the people that lead it better, so that the reflection of that becomes something that's better.
Yeah, ultimately, customers are coming to us, clients are coming to us because they have a problem, and either our service or our products solve that problem. And so, yeah, it's trying to get at that. Yeah, what is that problem that you solve? So, thank you. What makes you unique?
Oh, I think it's one of those things that I've just lived the experience. I don't talk from a theoretical standpoint. When I was 25, it was all theory and wondering if what I was saying was right and if it was true. I remember when I was in college, I was working on this personal development program. And somebody said, well, don't you think you ought to have some success before you go tell people how to have success? And I laughed. I said, yeah, I think you're right. But I still had this in my mind. But I think what it is I've been an investor in companies. I've been an entrepreneur who's been very blessed with success. I've been a president, CEO of for-profit companies, whether they're privately held or publicly traded. I've lived on the front line of the nonprofit world. I mean, I created the NASCAR program for the American Red Cross. And there was a whole story behind that. So I think the big difference in kind of what enables me to speak from the platform I speak from today is I've lived the things I talk about. And I know the things that work and the things that don't work. And most importantly, why and how to teach them and impart that to other people.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So, who would be somebody that should reach out to you? Who's a good contact for you?
Somebody, it depends on the company. Oftentimes I'll hear from the CEO, or I hear from someone in human resources, somebody's in charge of events. And a lot of times things that start as, hey, we'd like you to come in and do a keynote speech, turns into, hey, beyond that, could you do a Q&A with our executives? Or beyond that, we've got a CSO, for example, or our COO or our CEO, whoever, that is looking to refine some skills. Could you spend time with them and do that? It depends. I have some companies that say, hey, we're in trouble. Can you just spend time with us and help us figure out why and how to solve those problems? All of these things are solvable. All of these things. When people start giving up hope that they can't solve their problems, they have to understand that hope is one of the most powerful forces in human nature. It's the heartbeat of action. And there's not a problem professionally that you can't solve. Most of the problems are not product related. Most of the problems are people related. And one of the things I tell executives all the time, you got to stop appeasing people and start leading people. And if you'll learn how to lead properly, you'll make decisions that'll be so much better than they were before. So really, it depends on who that person is at a company that's looking for help, what they're looking for. I can most oftentimes help them refine these things and take it to a different level.
That's great. So, appeasing versus leading. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I think part of it's our culture we live in today. This isn't a political statement at all. It's just a cultural statement. We have a tendency, we have allowed feelings to kind of trump a lot of things. And so we have a feeling, we have this tendency not to hurt people. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. Well, when your business needs to live by certain principles to accomplish certain goals, you can't appease people. We have because we don't want to hurt people's feelings, we don't critique them properly at work. We don't tell them the truth about where they are versus where they should be. We have a tendency to soft pedal things. And a prime example is at the root of leadership. So if you picture a scale, and I'm talking about leadership acumen, I'm not talking about the quality of the people. If it's a 1 to 10, 10 being incredible leaders, 1 being people that just don't even care about leadership. And you find that the boss or the person that does the hiring, for example, is a 5. Generally, they recruit 3s and 4s into the organization because 3s and 4s makes a 5 feel better. If your boss is a 7, they generally recruit 8, 9s, and 10s because it makes them better. 5s and 6s have a tendency to appease people more. They don't want to hurt their feelings because they may not like that. Whereas a 7 or beyond has a tendency to tell people the truth about where they are in an empathetic, kind way, but the truth. And when they do, it makes the whole organization better. You have to learn to lead people. People by their nature are followers. I'm a follower. All leaders are followers. They just showed really good discernment early on in whom to follow. So they were able to become the leader. So it's not about protecting people's feelings. It's about equipping someone to become better at what they do so the organization becomes better and that person you're helping becomes better.
Oh, so good. All right. So as an author and a now longtime reader of lots and lots of books, where can people go? Can you point us to a handful of books on these topics to help those 5s and 6s become the 7s and 8s that are going to hire the 8s, 9s, and 10s?
Yeah, there's a number of places I'd recommend people to go today. I think Jordan Peterson. If you're not reading Jordan Peterson, you ought to look into Jordan Peterson. Excellent author. Andy Andrews is a personal friend of mine. Outstanding author. Bob Berg is a friend of mine. A great author. Co-wrote the book The Go-Giver. There's Simon Sinek wrote an incredible book called Start With Why. Gary Chapman wrote a book I'd highly recommend. This is going to sound odd in a business setting. It's called The 5 Love Languages. And if you understand the 5 love languages, it's a book basically that talks about, are you a person that is a gifts person, a words of affirmation person, a physical touch person, and you think of only personal relationships when you think of that. But when you start to understand that if I have an employee or somebody that I'm working with that is a gifts person, and I tell them they're doing a great job, it means little to them. Awesome. But if I were to give them a book and say, gosh, you're doing such a great job, I thought of you and I wanted to get you this book, all of a sudden they listen to everything you say because it's what they respond to. I think that there's a book called The Arc of Ambition that's an outstanding book. These are books for me that have made an impact. John Maxwell writes How to Develop the Leader Within You, How to Develop the Leaders Around You. These are all outstanding books for people to read.
Yeah, and in my experience, that once you get on the path of reading some of these books, they'll lead you to the next book and the next book. And if you mention it to someone like, oh, if you read that, you should read this. And it never ends, but it definitely builds on itself. And you can kind of start. I've read a lot of the books you just listed, and you can start anywhere and they're going to lead you to the next one. And then you can even reread some of those and you're going to learn something different because you'll be different when you get back to those books. So yeah, that's great.
Ken, it's funny. It's funny you say that about how books kind of plant seeds for you to the next book. It's the same thing I tell leaders about decisions they make. One of the biggest problems I find in corporate America today, or in companies all over the world, is the executive in charge of the decision is oftentimes afraid of making the decision because they're afraid they're going to make a bad decision. The reality is, if you're afraid you're going to make a bad decision, so you don't make a decision, you're going to be out of a job anyway because you're not making decisions. And one of the things I tell leaders all the time is, listen, make a decision. Get all the facts you can get, make a decision and step. You may not step this way, you may step this way. But what stepping that way does is introduce you to a different platform of decisions. Now you have all these other different criteria that you can use to make another decision. And so instead of being stuck, you go this way, to go this way, to go this way, to go this way, to go this way, and then you go up. It's like reading a book. It takes you to the next one. A decision takes you to new criteria that you can make a more refined decision. Stop being afraid of making decisions.
Yeah, well, it's Andy Andrews who says you don't have to make a right decision. You need to make a decision and then make it right. And
Make it
so,
right. That's
right?
the same principle. Yep,
Yeah.
same premise.
Yeah. Well, Bo, this has been fantastic. And we'll get those books in the show notes. So many great books in there. I love that 5 love languages idea because, yeah, it's about being a better communicator. And as you mentioned, and I totally agree, the problems in business are people problems. They're not the machine broke or we couldn't get
Right.
this or that to work properly or there's a process. It's a communication problem between people. It's always people, which the good news is that means we can solve it. Like you said, these problems are all solvable because they're rooted in human relations. And so getting better at human relations through things like the love languages, because yeah, if you're not able to communicate effectively and show appreciation in the way someone wants to receive appreciation, well, it's just a swing and a miss, and you're not going to get the results you're looking for. But boy, when you can tap in and you find that person whose words of affirmation is what they're looking for, and then you tell that person, great job. Yeah, that's a win.
Then it matters.
So
Then it matters.
yeah, so it's just that stuff's so powerful. So we'll have those links in the show notes. Also, I want to get in the show notes how to contact you. So what's the best way for people to reach out to you, Bo?
The best way is just email. If you go to info@bowshort.org, O-R-G, info@bowshort.org. My website is bowshort.org. And you can communicate with me through that if you'd like to. But it's the easiest way to reach me. And I get access to these things all day, so I'm good.
Okay, fantastic. Again, we'll get the books, we'll get the links, all that in the show notes. This has been an absolute pleasure, Bo. I so appreciate your time with us today and sharing some insights and wisdom. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I'm honored to be here. Appreciate you.
Oh, you're very welcome. All right. And that brings us to the end of another Clarity Advisors show. If this was valuable to you, we would certainly appreciate if you could go and leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you're watching or listening on. And with that, we will see you next time on the Clarity Advisors show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Clarity Advisors show. Clarity Advisors is a speaking, training, and consulting firm specializing in helping you simplify your sales and operating systems to improve efficiency and grow your profits. Connect with Clarity Advisors today to learn more about how they can help you improve communication and get your team aligned and engaged for greater success.